by 6 white men. But the case has exploded far beyond those charges.
You're dealing with a governor of this state and an attorney general of this state who believe that white people have rights that black folks do not have rights.
It's very obvious that they have their own agenda, which is not the interests of their client.
Good evening. I'm Ted Koppel, and this is Nightline.
No justice!
It has become a major racial and political quagmire, and clearly has touched a raw nerve. Now, there's a charge the entire case could be a hoax.
The Tawana Brawley story may be that there is no Tawana Brawley story.
Among our guests tonight, 2 advisors to Tawana Brawley and her family, attorney C. Vernon Mason and the Reverend Al Sharpton.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
This much can be said of the Tawana Brawley case without any fear of contradiction. One side or the other is lying like a bandit. Over the past few months, a minister and 2 lawyers who are acting as advisors to the Brawley family have variously claimed the involvement of the KKK and the IRA in the attack on Tawana. That federal, state, and local law enforcement in New York are dominated by organized crime, and that Tawana Brawley was forced to drink a liquid that caused her memory to be impaired. Meanwhile, authorities insist that forensic tests conducted just after Ms. Brawley was found indicate that she was neither raped nor sodomized, that she had not been beaten, and that she was not under the influence of narcotics. Incredibly, all of these claims and counterclaims have become almost irrelevant, because the case of Tawana Brawley has become a vehicle for a much broader issue, whether blacks can ever expect justice at the hands of a mostly white legal structure, to which one other question needs to be added. Is this the right case to prove that point? Here's Nightline correspondent Jeff Greenfield.
The bus brought the audience to the heart of Brooklyn's Bedford-Stuyvesant to witness the live television spectacle, Racial Politics as Theater.
You're saying if we do this, you have to... That is not the point. The point of it is whenever a black woman complains about a white man raping her, the black woman must be penalized. And that's what is happening here.
It has been running for more than 6 months now in New York, and it's made headlines across the country. A story that began as another tale of racial violence.
No justice! No peace! No justice!
Then metastasized into a bewildering barrage of questionable facts, escalating charges, puzzling motives, all rooted in an explosive mix of race and politics.
Don't you want to testify?
If this happened to this girl, I don't care who did it, they ought to be prosecuted.
If violence is commonplace in the city, and it is out of the ordinary, unexpected in Dutchess County.
Last November, the New York press reported a horrible story. 15-year-old Tawana Brawley from Wappingers Falls, New York, told of a 4-day ordeal at the hands of her attackers, one a police officer of some sort, who had abducted the teenager, dragged her into the woods, raped, sodomized, and beat her, then smeared her with dog excrement and left her in a plastic bag. Ms. Brawley's story seemed another link in a chain of racial violence. The death of Eleanor Bumpers during an altercation with New York police. The death of Michael Stewart after being arrested by New York Transit Police. The death of a young black man in Brooklyn's Howard Beach as he fled a white mob. It seemed to raise again the troubling question of whether a black could expect justice from the criminal justice system. Entertainer Bill Cosby visited the girl and offered a $25,000 reward.
Let Miss Brawley represent an example of what we're not going to stand for as parents, as Americans, and as human beings.
And the case was picked up by 2 New York lawyers whose careers reflected a passionate cynicism about the fairness of the criminal justice process. C. Vernon Mason and Alton Maddox, Jr.
She has no confidence in the judicial system here. Black people in this state have no confidence.
They were joined by Reverend Al Sharpton, a larger-than-life 33-year-old who was variously described as a community activist or as a relentless self-promoter.
And we promise this family that we'll fight until hell freezes over to get a special prosecutor to go in the courtroom and bring justice to Tawana Brawley.
Linked by FBI reports to organized crime figures and to work as an informant. When local prosecutors begged off the case because of a still unexplained conflict of interest, the three demanded the appointment of a special prosecutor.
What this state wants is to devote whatever it is necessary to devote to the effort of seeing that justice is done in the matter of Tawana Brawley.
New York Governor Mario Cuomo agreed and appointed the State Attorney General, Robert Abrams, to that post. But the Brawleys and advisors refused to cooperate, in language that grew increasingly heated.
The reality of it is that there were so many prominent suspects involved in this case that nobody locally in that county could handle the case. The point that we made is that if Abrams was appointed, he had to personally try this case.
The Brawley family is very strong. We know what we're doing, and we approve of everything the Reverend Al Sharpton says and our lawyers say.
Bit by bit, day by day, we learn a little more about the case of Tawana Brawley of Wappingers Falls. But as we learn more, we somehow know less about the 16-year-old...
Then the story began to change shape as reporters discovered major gaps in Tawana Brawley's story. Witnesses placed her in her old apartment on the days she said she had been tormented. Other witnesses said they saw her climbing into the plastic bag in which she had been found.
She was just squatting, crawled into the bag, hopped a couple of times, and laid down.
Her mother's common-law husband had a record of criminal violence, and there was no medical evidence of any sexual abuse.
They're using her as a pawn in some obscure political game of their own.
Long ago, this stopped being a story about what did or did not happen to a young black woman from upstate New York. It has instead become a story about the things we will not say to or about each other across the great racial divide. And it is about how the grievances of the past and political ambitions for the future have persuaded some that the truth about Tawana Brawley is almost irrelevant. Calvin Butts is pastor at Harlem's politically potent Abyssinian Baptist Church.
When you take a look at C. Vernon Mason and Alton Maddox, you see two men who have dedicated their lives to serving the black community and who have been very conversant with the legal justice system as it operates now and they know that it's bankrupt. And so what they're doing is using methods that they think are effective in order to bring it in line.
The real issue, I believe, is not the representation of Mason and Maddox, but the response of the criminal justice system to racially motivated violence when police are involved. They are representing their own interests. They obviously have a political agenda, an ideological agenda, and they are doing everything to pursue and accomplish that agenda.
The Brawley advisors acknowledged the broader nature of their arguments. When Phil Donahue asked them whether this case was the right way to illustrate racism, here was Maddox's response.
We are living in a state that is controlled by the mob and the mafia.
That's right.
Hazel Dukes, head of the New York NAACP, has publicly deplored the tactics in this case.
And for these three men to have used this for their political ambition and to increase whatever their calling is absolutely absurd.
And the story took on an even more bizarre turn yesterday when Perry McKinnon, who served as a key lieutenant to Al Sharpton, publicly declared that the Brawley advisors and lawyers knew their case was fundamentally false.
And you warned Maddox?
I warned him. I said, legally, you're going to be in trouble legally trying to pursue this. He says, I'm not going to pursue it legally, I'm going to pursue it politically.
Well, if Tawana Brawley, the person who knows the most about what happened over a 4-day period, that's 100 hours, doesn't come forward, never tells us who did what to her and under what circumstances and where she was, it's painfully clear and obvious that we're not going to get to the bottom of this case.
The forces that have taken up the Brawley case have adopted a simple slogan: no justice, no peace. The issue is whether their tactics, their strategy, or their intentions will produce either justice or peace. I'm Jeff Greenfield for Nightline in New York.
When we come back, we'll be joined by the Reverend Al Sharpton, who is serving as an advisor on this case to Tawana Brawley and her family, and by C. Vernon Mason, one of two attorneys representing the Brawleys. With us now in our New York studios is the Reverend Al Sharpton, the controversial minister from Brooklyn, New York, who's been advising the Brawleys in this case. Also in New York, attorney C. Vernon Mason, one of two attorneys representing the Brawley family. Last year, Mr. Mason represented the two black survivors in the Howard Beach case, a confrontation between 3 blacks and a group of white teenagers in Queens, New York, in which 1 black was killed when he was chased into oncoming traffic and a 2nd black was severely beaten. Mr. Sharpton, let me take some of your public statements at face value and take you at your word. You are absolutely convinced that Tawana Brawley was raped, sodomized, smeared with excrement, stuffed into a plastic bag, and that all of those things happened, correct?
Absolutely.
Now, if that is so, then is it not reasonable that you want the people who committed the crime to be charged with that crime?
Not only charged, we want them convicted and put in jail.
Precisely. Now, given the legal establishment as it exists today, we have to conclude one of 2 things. Either you're not satisfied with it as it exists and you're trying to tear it down and create a new one, or you're going to have to go with it, good or bad, for what it is. Which is it going to be?
Well, what it's going to be is that if you continually use a system that has not worked for black people in this state, you must begin to make that system adjust, as we did in Howard Beach. The 3 of us were involved at the forefront there, which got your next guest his job. And that was the only racial case in which we were able to get a measure of justice. Only a measure because 2 of them are still free. But the fact of the matter, Ted, is this girl was found with excrement all over her body, KKK, nigger written all over her torso. The medical records show she was unconscious. All of the testing proved she was not feigning that. They did not test her for rape, as you stated, because they picked her up as homeless. We have the facts and the evidence that an assistant district attorney and a state trooper did this. Mr. Cuomo and Mr. Abrams has done everything but call these people before the grand jury. They've even got an ex-friend of mine, tried to make him my aide, who's a very sick man. His family will expose that in the morning, to try to discredit a story he doesn't even know, rather than calling the assailants in front of the grand jury and making them face the music.
Now, Mr. Sharpton, you've raised a number of issues there. Let me pick up on one of the last ones first. You say tomorrow morning Perry McKinnon's family is going to reveal that he has what?
He has some mental problems. I don't want to waste our 6.5 minutes on all of them. I will say...
No, I don't want you to waste 6.5 minutes.
All right, well, fine. He has some mental problems. Mr. McKinnon has a history of medical disorders in terms of mental problems. But Mr. McKinnon has raised some very interesting things. It was Perry McKinnon that gave us and CBS TV Local the information that Mr. Pagonis was hooked to the mob. They ran a story where Mr. Pagonis fixed licenses for liquor with the mob, and it was Mr. McKinnon who told us that this mob tie went to the governor, and it was the governor's mob ties, which is why he didn't run for president.
Yeah, now,
so if Perry McKinnon is a credible witness on Al Sharpton, then maybe he's telling the truth about Mario Cuomo, that Mario Cuomo couldn't run for president because of mob ties.
Yeah, I was just about to ask you, at which point do his mental problems create a problem for you? Are you willing to accept any part of his statement, then?
I'm not the one that brought Perry McKinnon public. Other people were. You should ask them that.
All right, let me move on to Mr. Mason. Mr. Mason, you're an attorney, therefore an officer of the court. You understand that any accused has the right to confront his accuser. That's not being made very easy in this case, because your advice seems to be to the Brawley family that neither Miss Brawley nor her mother, Ms. Brawley, give any kind of testimony to the grand jury.
Ted, that's not what happened here at all. As a matter of fact, the family had fully cooperated with the authorities for a period of several days prior to the first district attorney, William Grady, telling the family after they had given him descriptions, given him all kinds of information, that he had no suspects. They interpreted that quite properly to mean that he was not willing to arrest those suspects who in fact were named. He then cites an unspecified conflict of interest. David Saul is then appointed by Judge Hillary, who says that this case presents very difficult problems because it involves higher officials in the Dutchess County government.
Let me interrupt you for one moment and go easy on us here, because you're talking to a national audience, and many of these names that you're mentioning here mean absolutely nothing to them. The question that I'm asking is, why is it your counsel to Ms. Brawley that she not testify before the grand jury?
It's the same strategy that we used, Ted, effectively in the Howard Beach case. That is, we first cooperated with authorities until they demonstrated that they had no intentions of arresting or prosecuting or investigating the case. And a crime victim has a right at that point, a legal and moral responsibility, especially the mother and the daughter, not to participate in a cover-up. Bob Abrams talks about, we're in this for our political agenda. He wants to run for the governor. The governor, in fact, told us that in addition to the fact that Bob Abrams has never tried a criminal case, has never prosecuted a case. We had another person who's on the show who will be coming on shortly, Mr. Hines, who Alton Maddox was responsible for creating the situation which allowed him to be the prosecutor in Howard Beach.
But he did a good job, didn't he?
He wants to run for mayor.
Didn't he do a good job?
No, Charles Hines wants to run for mayor. They always accuse him of having a political agenda.
Mr. Mason, my question to you is, didn't he do a good job? He got the conviction, didn't he?
He did his duty as a prosecutor. But the problem that we're having now, Ted, is this. Hines works for the governor. Hines works for Bob Abrams. Hines is now going around acting as if he doesn't know us at all. He was on Eyewitness News Conference on Sunday saying that Alton Maddox was spewing hate and anger. But the point being, in terms of the criminal justice system in this state, we have 62 county attorneys throughout the state of New York. All of them are white. We have a system, Ted, which you know because we've appeared on this program before, in which over the years it has been virtually impossible to get justice for blacks when they are involved with perpetrators who are white in this state.
Let me
the government
interrupt
has
you.
done absolutely nothing.
Let me interrupt you because we got to take a break. I'll come back to you a little later in the broadcast, but when we come back immediately, we'll be joined by Attorney Charles Hines, who served as special prosecutor in the Howard Beach affair, as we mentioned earlier. Attorney Charles Hines bears the title of Special State Prosecutor for Investigation of the New York City Criminal Justice System. He was, as we mentioned, Special Prosecutor in the Howard Beach racial confrontation case, a case in which 3 white teenagers were convicted of manslaughter. He joins us now live in our New York studio. Mr. Hines, what Mr. Mason said a moment ago is true. If it had not been for his tactics and the tactics of his colleagues, you would not have been appointed in the Howard Beach case. Are they not justified then in thinking it worked once? Why not try it again?
Well, let's assume that's true and totally accurate. The question is, though, that in this case, in Wappinger Falls and Dutchess County, nothing is different than the Queens County case. In both instances, the district attorney of the respective counties stepped aside. In both instances, the governor, Mario Cuomo, committed total resources to the investigation, gave me everything I needed for the case. In this case, he went one step further. He appointed one of the other 3 elected officials, statewide elected officials, Robert Abrams, the Attorney General. And Bob Abrams has committed himself and the resources of his office to see that the rule of law operates. And that's the thing we really have to focus on.
Now, Mr. Mason has said publicly, as indeed has Mr. Maddox, that one of the problems they have with Mr. Abrams is that he's never prosecuted a case before. Well, he has no experience.
I don't think that's the issue at all. Bob Abrams has dozens and dozens of superb trial lawyers on staff. He has a staff of 400 lawyers. And the fact of the matter is, he appeared in the grand jury at the beginning of the proceeding, has virtually moved his office out of Manhattan into Dutchess County, which gives a very clear signal that the elected Attorney General of the state of New York is ready, willing, and able to commit all the resources necessary to see that the rule of law operates just as it did in Howard Beach. And the downside of this tragedy is that this child, Tawana Brawley, is not going to receive justice as long as she's given the kind of advice that she's received so far.
Well, I don't think it's stating anything extraordinary to say that there are clearly some political motives at work here, and indeed Mr. Mason and Mr. Sharpton have admitted as much when they say, look, they have no faith in the criminal justice system, and that many blacks, if not most blacks, feel the same way. Therefore, they feel the need to change it. That's what they're doing.
Well, I don't think it does anything to add to the debate to talk about alleged political motives. Mr. Mason or Mr. Maddox or Reverend Sharpton. I think the important thing is to understand that nothing is different from Dutchess County than it was in Queens County. And the rule of law has to operate, and it can only operate, we can only get to the bottom of this if they agree to have Ms. Brawley cooperate with Attorney General Abrams. I think everyone wants to understand what really happened that awful night in November of 1987, and we're all entitled to know that.
They have expressed concern about Mrs. Brawley, the mother, going before a grand jury precisely because grand jury proceedings are secret, and they have a feeling that what will happen is the whole thing will be whitewashed and boom, they'll be out of there and the case will be over, dismissed.
Well, I don't know what Reverend Sharpton talks about when he says, for example, that the assistant district attorney or the state trooper has not been called before the grand jury. He may not know, but I'm sure Mr. Mason knows as an attorney that they would be able to assert their Fifth Amendment privilege if they were called before the grand jury. I'm not aware of what information the Attorney General had. when he asked Mrs. Brawley to come before the grand jury. But I take Bob Abrams by reputation. He has a world-class reputation for respecting the civil rights of others, and I think that's well understood by
That's not true either, Ted.
Excuse me, I didn't interrupt you,
Yes,
Mr. Mason, all right?
Actually, Mr. Hines, I'm afraid I'm going to have to interrupt you because we have to take a break, but we're going to be back in just a moment. We'll continue our conversation. I want to warn our affiliates we're going to be going just a few minutes over so that we have an opportunity to bring this conversation at least to some kind of a conclusion, but I also want to warn our guests we're not going to go very much over. Continuing our conversation now with the Reverend Al Sharpton and with Vernon Mason. Mr. Mason, you were interrupting just toward the end of the last segment there because you were disagreeing with something Mr. Hines was saying. What was that?
Ted, I just want to say this very, very briefly. Everything is different about this case. Here you had the first district attorney, William Grady, up in Dutchess County, who gave several $1,000s to the local NAACP. These were the initial lawyers who the Brawley family fired when they found this out and when they started discouraging them from pursuing this case. You also had involved, as Judge Hillary said, top officials of Dutchess County who were named as accused persons. Here you had a state trooper, an assistant district attorney, the conflict of interest that Mr. Grady does not want to talk about. And it involved, not like Howard Beach, young kids who basically did what they did to Michael Griffith and to Cedric Sanderford and Timothy Grimes, but here you had the establishment of a major county in the state of New York.
Well, let me just interrupt you for one moment to make note of a rather tiny point, but it's an important one. These are the people that you and Ms. Brawley are accusing of having done that. They haven't had a trial yet.
But they have not been called for it.
Hold on just one second. You heard what Mr. Hines said a moment ago, that before a grand jury, they would have the right to plead the Fifth Amendment, not incriminating themselves. Therefore, it's very unlikely that much is going to come out of their testimony before a grand jury. But I must say, Mr. Sharpton, it seems somewhat disingenuous to suggest that nothing would come out of Ms. Brawley's testimony. She, after all, is the only one who can possibly know what happened.
Well, Mr. Copper, let me say this. First of all, according to the New York State law, Public Officers Code 3, someone that holds a public office can be required to testify before a grand jury or they forfeit their office.
That's not true.
Well, let me finish.
That's not true.
Well, I'll tell you what, Mr. Hines, if you're the legal expert on this, my understanding of the Constitution is that no one can be required to testify.
Your understanding is absolutely correct.
Well, let me finish my point.
The issue here is
you asked me a point about Ms. Brawley. Can I finish answering that? No, you interrupted me, Mr. Hines. I didn't interrupt you.
Well,
in terms of Ms. Brawley,
I'm not going to shout with you. You're a much better shouter.
Let me just finish what I'm saying.
You're a much better shouter than
Well, I might be a better prosecutor, too, but let me just say this.
I doubt that.
Ms. Brawley had chosen not to cooperate when she brought us in. And you played a tape where she said herself that she was in full agreement with that. I think the issue here is that with all of the litany of cases over the last several years in which Bob Abrams was Attorney General, that blacks have not received justice under the present grand jury setup. There is a prevalent feeling among many blacks, and the Brawley family is among them, that they cannot trust a secret grand jury proceeding to get justice. And I think people need to deal with that issue.
Ted, can I interrupt for a moment?
Go ahead.
The issue is justice for Tawana Brawley, and no amount of rhetoric, no amount of rhetoric to make that happen.
Mr. Mason, I'll tell you what, we can try if we want to have all four of us talking at the same time, and then we can ensure that none of us will be heard. If you let Mr. Hines finish, I'll come to you, Mr. Mason, right after.
As I was saying, Ted, that no amount of rhetoric can make that happen. Only the rule of law can make that happen, just as the rule of law operated effectively in Howard Beach.
It did not. It did not.
Okay.
What happened in Howard Beach, we received the same kind of criticisms, Ted, that we're getting now in the Tawana Brawley case. Joe Hines did not come out when we were receiving all that criticism. Alton Maddox was vilified in the National Law Journal, in Newsday, and local media behind his stance on Howard Beach, and it was only after thousands of black people took to the streets that Charles Hines was appointed special prosecutor.
Well, actually, we've come to kind of an interesting question now, because it seems to me that part of what you two gentlemen are trying to do is perhaps to change the legal system in the streets.
Absolutely.
Now, that may or may not be a commendable thing to do, but let's just talk about it for a moment. To what degree are you trying to do that?
We're trying to establish the fact that there is a prevalent racial problem in the state of New York probably around the Northeast, but particularly in this state.
No, I know
And
you've said that already 2 or 3 times on this program.
I'm trying to answer you.
No, my question was whether you're trying to change the legal system in the streets.
We're trying to change the legal system in the streets, in the courts, and in other areas that are available to us. We are trying to use whatever is available to us to say that people that do crimes against us are not being penalized for it.
The grand juries
Even in Howard Beach,
Mr.
2 of the
Sharpton.
people that were convicted are home tonight. Let's not talk about Howard Beach as some great model. 2 of the convicted people and the 3 that were convicted in Howard Beach are home
They
tonight.
are free on bail pending appeal. And
If they were black, they would not have been given bail, in my opinion.
That's just not, well, in your opinion doesn't meet the facts at all of how our criminal justice system operates. Bob Abrams stands ready to bring justice to this child, and you're preventing it.
That's not correct.
You're preventing it.
That is not correct.
And that's the continuing shame that what you're doing to that child.
Mr. Hines, I think the shame is for you, an employee of Mr. Abrams, to sit here and act like you're objective when you're not. You have to go and get your check from and say, I understand that, Charlie. You got to get paid. But we're not going to give this girl to a grand jury that would give her mother 30 days in jail and not even try to call in those that are responsible. I don't care how much they pay you. They do not pay us, and we will not give Tawana Brawley to a man that in 12 years has never opened his mouth as Attorney General in Washington.
Mr. Sharpton, hold on just one second, Mr. Hines. While it is true that Mr. Hines is on the government payroll, it's also true that you, Mr. Sharpton, have been raising money for the Tawana Brawley case.
Where?
This is just one of the many things that your friend Perry McKinnon is charging.
He charged you and established that. Tell me where we raise any money for the Brawley.
You tell me. Hold on just one second.
From the relative
Hold
of
on
Mr.
just one
McKinnon.
second, Mr. Mason.
And the relative said
Mr. Sharpton,
he has medical discharge from the Army. He has mental problems over a period of years. They have tried to assist him with that. He is going to go public with us tomorrow to show that this man, who now the governor has asked for us to be disbarred, arrested, Bob Abrams has embraced as the key witness in this case, is going to be discredited himself by his family.
Why can't you find it in your heart to urge this child to testify before the grand jury so she
Because
can
Tawana
get
Brawley
justice?
has no faith in Bob Abrams, and you know why, Joe Hines. Bob Abrams has never tried a criminal case. You would not ask your daughter to be subjected to that. That's just number one.
Bob Abrams has dozens and dozens of trial lawyers.
All of the things that he's done over the last several years. You know, as we have tried to get justice for Eleanor Bumpers, Michael Stewart, all of these cases, these 300 transit arrests that were made and fabricated, Bob Abrams has not opened his mouth. Tawana Brawley has asked that he step aside.
Mr. Mason, you've got to forgive me. Mr. Sharpton and I still have a little bit of business that we've got to conclude, and then we're going to wrap this program up. Now, you see, you bristle somewhat righteously against my having raised charges.
No, I didn't. I asked you to substantiate.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's precisely the point I wanted to raise with you. You see, your client, not your client, the person that you are advising right now, has also raised some rather serious charges.
And is prepared to back them up.
And is not prepared to substantiate them, is not prepared to substantiate them under the current system as it exists.
That's not true.
At your advice.
That is not true. She is not prepared to substantiate them to one that she feels is leaning toward covering it up.
Now,
she is prepared within this
hold
system.
on, Mr. Sharpton. We're talking about a young lady who was 15 years old when it happened, who is now 16 years old.
And who you just played a tape of saying that she's full of caught of what is going on in terms of the whole strategy. Whose mother is sitting in a church right now because they have firm beliefs that Bob Abrams is part of the cover. Not against the system.
You're
Give us
telling
another
me,
prosecutor in the system.
Mr. Sharpton, you are telling me, at some length I might add, that this young lady is sophisticated enough about the means by which justice is or is not perpetrated in New York State, that without your counsel, she has come to the conclusion that she doesn't want this case to be tried.
They fired the NAACP
and sent for us because they didn't want to cooperate. We didn't start the non-cooperation. We were brought in after the non-cooperation was established, Ted. Their lawyers within ACP, they were fired because they wanted to cooperate.
Gentlemen, this is one of those nights when I wish we could go on for a while. We've already gone way beyond our time. I thank all of you for joining us this evening. Good of you to come in. That's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
This has been Nightline. If you wish a printed transcript of this or any Nightline broadcast, please send $3 to Nightline Transcripts, 267 Broadway, New York, New York, 10007. Nightline is a presentation of ABC News.
June Learner of the Month.